Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1986 pseudo-biographical drama film, JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling. Now, JoJo Dancer is a film that, honestly, I've been curious about seeing for a while now because I'm a big fan of Richard Pryor. He's also one of my favorite stand-up comedians. And he's done a lot of films that I really enjoy and have a lot of fun with. And this is a film that he co-wrote, he directed, he produced, and he also starred in. And it was based on a lot of events in his own life. So because of that, I was definitely really intrigued by this movie. And I can say after finally sitting down and watching it that it was worth at least one watch for Pryor's performance and for some other elements of the film, but it still was honestly a little disappointing. Like, it was one of those movies where you're like, this could have been amazing, but it just turns out to be adequate. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on the film, I want to give a special shout out to Brian for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. Link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling, it's directed by Richard Pryor. And this was his first film that he directed. And I think his last. He's listed as a director, I think, on his last stand-up special movie, Here and Now. But that's not really the same sort of thing as directing a feature film. And here is honestly one of the major things that holds this film back from greatness, if you ask me. It's Richard Pryor as the director. He's not terrible. He's not bad. He's just eh. He's just there. He's just in the middle as a director. And so there's a lot of moments where the direction is honestly a little flat. It doesn't have as much life or as much energy as I think it could with a different director who has more experience. Also, I feel that because he directed it, he's not really able to break away from his own limitations as a director. So that affects the film in other ways in terms of the way that it's framed, the way that it utilizes different types of camera techniques and angles. So it's one of those movies where there are some moments with the direction where it's fine. He frames the shot up in a decent fashion, and there might be a okay pan or zoom, but there's really not a lot of style and flair to it. And at times it kind of makes it look like a TV melodrama. So I really feel that with a better director, somebody who is more established, somebody who is more experienced, it really would have elevated this film. But at the same time, I honestly wonder if the reason why Pryor himself directed it was mainly for comfort, for him to be able to deal with these more difficult aspects of his life that actually happened fairly recently. And I think maybe that's something that he didn't feel comfortable doing with a different director. So maybe that's part of it, but I think he's a good enough actor, and I think he was in a good enough headspace at the time. I think he could have handled it, uh, and I think he would have been up to the challenge, and it would have helped his performance. It would have helped the performances of the entire cast. It would have just helped the film in general, because as much as I do love Pryor, and I miss him, and I think he is an immense, incredible talent, he's not a very good director. He's just run of the mill, where he's an amazing, legendary comedian and an above average actor. He's not really anything special when it comes to being the guy behind the camera. Now, he also wrote the film along with Paul Mooney and Rocco Urbisky. And the whole approach that the film has of adapting Pryor's life, but centering it around a fictional character is definitely interesting. And I think it enables Pryor to be retrospective on his own life in a way that he might not have felt as comfortable doing otherwise. And the whole structure of the film is definitely unique. It's set up in a lot of ways kind of like a Twilight Zone episode, where you have this famous comedian who basically tries to commit suicide one night and lights themselves on fire with alcohol during a drug binge. And they're in critical condition in the hospital, and their own soul escapes from their body and takes the body on a journey through the past and reminiscing about life and the experiences that the comedian went through when before he decided to try to take his own life, and delving into why he ultimately wound up in the position that he was, uh, where he wound up being so traumatized and so unable to deal with a lot of issues and his own drug addiction that he decided to try to take the easy way out. And then he winds up, covered in burns and in the hospital and looking for a reason to live. And I think the structure is interesting. The execution is kind of wonky. And I know that Pryor did this on purpose in terms of the scattershot, scatterbrained, out of order trajectory of the story, because he mentioned that memory doesn't work that way. Memory is not in chronological order, and that may be true, but this isn't something that's supposedly a work of nonfiction. So I don't really feel that that necessarily has to apply. And I think maybe there is something to be said about that being a small aspect of the story. Maybe like one of the flashbacks is set up that way, but not the entirety of the story, because it just makes it hard to follow. And it really affects the pacing and the flow of the story. So his first time that he decides to look back into the past is when he was a kid, growing up in a brothel, in a whorehouse. And he is reminiscing about his mom and his life when he was younger, when he was a kid. And then after that, it fast forwards to him leaving his father and going to Cleveland to try to make it as a comedian, as a stand-up guy. And that's where he meets this striptease artist in Satin Doll, and she gives him a job. And that whole sequence, to be honest, really sagged to me in terms of the pacing. It felt like it was way longer than it actually was. I think it probably didn't help that there was a lot of stuff going on in that either was uncomfortable or awkward or both. Like there's this side character who's a part of Satin's team or group of friends, who's an actor I've seen in other stuff. I believe it was Art Evans. I think that's who it was. It might not be him. No, yeah, it was Art Evans. And Art Evans, I've seen him in a bunch of stuff. Like he's been in X Files and Tales from the Hood. He was in Fright Night. He was one of the cops in Fright Night. if I remember correctly. And he plays this guy who has a stutter, and it's just incredibly annoying and like not funny. And it's just that's the whole gag is that the guy has a stutter. And then there's the stuff with Satin Doll, and especially the bit where Richard Pryor he dresses up in full drag and does the same striptease that Satin Doll did. He's stripping, shaking his ass, uh, rubbing a boa in between his legs, all while he's in full drag. I mean, maybe that's based on something that actually happened in Pryor's life, but even if it did, it's just awkward and it's not really funny. It's just awkward and surreal, and it almost looks like something out of a David Lynch movie. And then that whole bit doesn't really amount to whole much. He does one of his first stand-up routines, which is actually pretty funny, when he imitates a baby being born. But then after that, you have the strip tease. It's awkward and weird. His boss doesn't want to pay him and Satin Doll's crew's money. He goes in and threatens them with threatens the boss of the blank. Almost gets killed for his troubles, but he gets saved by a cop who happens to be dating Satin Doll, played by Michael Ironside of all people. And then Satin Doll basically kicks him out on his ass and says, "Yeah, you got to go." Because I guess maybe the mob is now going to be trying to do a hit on him because of what he did with the guy who ran the club. And he's left in a bus station with some money the Satin Doll left him. And you're like, okay, what is he going to do next? Like, how is JoJo going to go from this bus station in the middle of Cleveland and make it in LA, or get to LA, or become this rising star and stand up? No, you never get that. You never get to that point. That is never even mentioned. That is never even discussed. You don't know what happens after that point, because the next memory that you are thrown into is one with JoJo and I think his first wife Dawn, who I think wound up becoming the mother of his child, of his daughter. And it's just you're just there with them in Dawn's bedroom and they're chatting. And then you see a few scenes of JoJo doing some stand up at this club and starting to become pretty popular. And then he winds up going to a party where he was invited to by Wings Hauser, who plays this druggie, and this guy gives him coke and gives him all these girls, and his wife or his girlfriend at the time Dawn is there and she bangs Wings Hauser, and JoJo is pissed at Wings Hauser and punches him, and you get this tense moment between him and Dawn, and then that's it. Then after that, the next memory is when JoJo first sees Michelle, this woman, this African American woman that he falls for. He sees her at a club one night, and then she winds up becoming his next wife. And then there's this whole bit where he screws up and cheats on her, and she's doing stuff behind his back, and it just blows up in a bad way, to the point where JoJo even winds up driving this car that she got from this former friend of hers off a cliff. And then it goes to the moment when JoJo poured alcohol on himself in a manic drug binge and lit himself on fire and then wound up in a hospital. And then that's the moment when I think he goes back maybe one more time to the past, or and then he flashes forward and then goes to the moment when he lit himself on fire, and then his body accepts his spirit's help and he decides to live, and then it's the final stand up which is the bit where he's talking about the freebasing incident from his perspective, or actually, it's kind of from an outsider's perspective, but in a funny way. And that's the end of the story. That's the end of the movie. It felt like there was a lot of aspects of this script that were just lacking and missing for a movie that is going deeper and delving farther into Pryor's life and his experiences. And I understand that, yes, memory can be like that. Memory can be set up in a way where you only reminisce and remember certain events, and they don't always connect together in the most cohesive fashion. But that doesn't mean that that's a good template for a film and for a script, because it's hard to follow, it's hard to get into. And it doesn't help either that there's definitely not really a very satisfying conclusion to everything, or continuation of these stories. Like, you just left with a lot of questions and left wanting more, and you don't get it. But that being said, there are still some good things in this script. I do think a lot of the stuff when Pryor was a kid is handled pretty well. I think there are some moments with him and Satin Doll that I think are pretty sweet and charming. I think there's some moments with his wives that are also pretty solid in terms of the way that they're written and the storytelling. Some of the stand-up routines are recreated pretty well, and are still really funny. But there's a lot of stuff, though, comedy-wise, other than the stand-up routines, that doesn't really work that well because of the tone of the script. It's almost like the tone just doesn't really know exactly where it wants to go most of the time. It doesn't know if it wants to be a serious drama about Pryor's life and his experiences and his struggles with drug addiction, or it wants to be a comedy. It's like, I don't really think you can necessarily do both things, or you can, but not in the way that this script handles it, because it just comes across as very jumbled and not very well put together. So it's a screenplay that has some moments of dialogue that are fine, some character moments that are fairly strong and emotionally resonant, but it lacks cohesion. It lacks a consistent narrative. It's just something that is just very meandering and just kind of there as a story. So I definitely feel the script is another reason why this film isn't anywhere near as good as it could be. It's fine if it's JoJo Dancer and it's not Richard Pryor playing himself. I'm fine with that aspect. It enables the story to be a little more creative. You can take some more creative liberties with the story, and it wouldn't be too much of a problem because it's not a straight up biopic, it's a pseudo biopic. But I wanted more. I wanted more about his life as a kid. I wanted more about him as, a teenager. I wanted more. I mean, you didn't even get to see him as a teenager. I wanted to see some of that. I wanted to see more about him living with his dad and him meeting his first wife and how that all went and how that went down. I want to see what happens after he leaves the club in Cleveland and what he does to ultimately get into the position where he's doing these successful tours at different comedy clubs across the United States, and winds up getting the attention of Dawn, and then they fall for one another. And then I want to see the actual moment when the two fully broke up, and then he goes to focus his attention on Michelle, and then maybe even a little bit more on his success as a film star, because that's barely even touched upon at all. It's like in one scene he shows up to dailies or whatever drunk, and that's all you really get. So I would have liked to have seen more of that as well. It just feels like it tells half of Richard's story, and that's just not at all what you expect or what you are looking for out of a film based upon Richard Pryor's life and his experiences. Now the cast is pretty good. I mean, Richard Pryor as JoJo Dancer, I definitely feel that it features honestly some of his best, most earnest work as an actor. So I think if you want to see Richard Pryor in a more serious role and see him handle something that's pretty challenging and pretty difficult, this is definitely a film to check out at least once. And I think that's a big part of why I'm glad I at least saw it one time, just so I could see Richard's performance in it. He does not disappoint when it comes to his acting in the film. Paula Kelly is also good as Satin Doll. Art Evans, not so much. Barbara Williams is Dawn. I thought she was pretty good. Had some good chemistry with Richard in the scenes that they had. Um, feel the same way about Debbie Allen and the whole friction between her and Richard. Um, I liked Carmen McRae as Richard's grandmother. Or in Diane Abbott as his mom. It was fun to see Wings Hauser as this coked up party guy, Cliff, in a short but memorable role. It was definitely pretty wild to see Michael Ironside in this as well as a detective. Dennis Farina is in this as a character named Freddie, who's like this guy who runs one of the clubs that uh, Richard Richard's character Jojo was performing at. And I also want to give credit to Elon Cox. Speaking of Jojo, the actor who played the young Jojo dancer, I thought the kid did a good job with his performance as well. Um, the cinematography by John A. Alonso, it's not awe-inspiring. It's not astonishing by any means. It's just more average stuff, more average work, to be honest. The editing by Don Camburn at points is it's kind of janky, kind of not the best in terms of the transitions. But there are some moments where it works. The music by Herbie Hancock, I liked it. I liked the score, but I would say it's not particularly memorable, but it fits for what the film is trying to do and the overall tone of it. I definitely liked My Destiny more by Chaka Khan than anything that was in the score, because that's the bit of music that plays during the opening credits and also plays at the end credits. I think that's actually a pretty catchy song, so that's one of the better things about the movie, in my opinion, that's held up pretty well is that song. It's like 97 minutes, but it does drag because, like I said, it doesn't have a good flow to it because everything's just so weird in terms of how the story is told with all these fractured memories and fragments of JoJo's life, which I know it's by design. Richard has explained that in interviews. It still doesn't make for a very consistently compelling narrative because it's hard to really get drawn into it because, oh, I'm interested in this, but we barely are there. Or I want to see what happens after this, but we don't get it. Oh, I want to see what is going on here and what led to this point. You're not going to see that. So it doesn't really provide what you're looking for when it comes to a story of somebody's life. If this was a short, then this could be something that I think would have been more manageable. But as a feature film, this approach to tell the story, it really hampers the movie and holds it back from being as good as it could possibly be. So, yeah, I would say if you're a diehard Richard Pryor fan and you haven't seen this one yet, I would say definitely check it out sometime, just for Richard's performance and because it clearly meant a lot to him. But if you're not really the biggest Pryor fan, or you really don't want to see honestly pretty depressing pseudo biopic of Richard Pryor's life with not a lot of laughs, then I would probably say go ahead and skip this one. I would say this got a lot of mixed reviews by critics when it came out for a legit reason. And honestly, it is one of my least favorite Pryor films that I've seen. I mean, there are some other ones that I would say are worse, like Another You, and maybe like one or a couple others. But I wouldn't say this is really one of his finest hours as a whole. It features some of his best work as an actor, but that doesn't mean that I think it's one of his best works overall. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on Richard Pryor's JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.